otherwise, if they have anything that resembles almost an allergy to the sacred, this can even start before the what Father Amorth called patients would come to see him. They would not be able to enter into a chapel or a church. It would cause them literal physical pain. So something presenting that type of pain, any type of change in the behavior, knowledge of hidden things, particularly languages they would look out for. That's something you see in a lot of movies is, oh, why does he know Latin? Why does he know Greek? That's not, or with some of the weirder cases, no one knows Aramaic. Why does he know Aramaic? And things like that. So knowledge or knowledge of even hidden things that might be in the priest's life or in the lives of the people around them, if they know something that they just should not know, it could be a sign of the demonic.
Hello, and welcome to the Spirit Box podcast, where we explore folklore, magic, the world of the spirits, and everything in between. Now, you might notice my voice sounds a bit strange. Well, it's because I'm ill. I've been trying to shake this bloody flu or whatever it is for the last 3 weeks or so. Everyone in my bloody house has been sick, but it's just the way it is at this time of year, right? So, if my voice is really irritating to listen to, there's probably not much there's not much I can do, and there's probably not much value in you listening to the show, but I hope you can struggle on through it, because it's an interesting show today. Today we welcome Michael Lichens back to the show. He was one of the guests in the early days, and discussed a really interesting character called an Italian priest called Father Gabriele Amorth. Now, you might recall a film recently with Russell Crowe called The Pope's Exorcist. Well, it was based on Father Amorth. And we discuss his new book called, or the book on Father Amorth's notes called Get By Me, Satan. And it looks at things, from Father Amorth's research and experience of how people come under the attack of demonic entities. And I think it's an interesting thing to look at things from a different perspective, what we traditionally do on the Spirit Box. And that is one of the initial points of the project when I set out to do this initially, was to look at things from all sides, to give a kind of a broad view of the strange world that we live in. Okay, that's it from me. Let's get on with the show. Okay, so listeners, you might notice my voice sounds slightly weird. I am ill. I have been ill for a couple of weeks now, with just a virus that's doing the rounds. That said, we can all get past it. Michael J. Lichens, it's very, very good to welcome you to the show. Back for the second time. You were a guest in the early days of the show. Really nice to have you back. I'm going to try and not talk so much in the show.
Understandable. Thanks for having me on, even with the voice.
Thank you. But to get things rolling, could you introduce yourself and a bit about Father Amorth, just a refresher?
Sure. So on the personal side, I'll keep it very short. I write and I edit. I have a fascination, especially in the supernatural and what I like to call cases of high strangeness. So this brings me to Father Amorth, who, best way to sum him up, he's often nicknamed the Pope's Exorcist, and until he died in 2016, he was bar none the most popular, most quoted exorcist in the world. Uh, he the I like to sum him up by starting at his childhood. He thought he was going to be a lawyer, maybe wanted to be a priest. World War II happened, threw it all up in the air. He decided to fight on the side of the partisans against the Axis powers. And by the age of 20, he had won a Medal of Valor for his combat in the partisan war, as well as becoming an advisor to a future prime minister of Italy, helping to shape the constitution of the modern republic. And again, this was all before he was 20. As a 40-year-old man, that just baffles me, but he continued to baffle people because he would go on to be an editor and a journalist before joining the priesthood And after years of doing your typical, he would teach Italian in schools, he worked on a couple of diocesan magazines. Suddenly he was approached and asked, "Have you ever thought about becoming an exorcist?" To which he responded, "No, I'm a jokester. I don't have a serious bone in my body. I can't be an exorcist." They disagreed, and in particularly the head exorcist of Rome at the time, Candido Montini, another interesting figure, insisted that he should become an exorcist. So for 30 years, he was Rome's chief exorcist. And during that time, he gave interviews, wrote books, was a very approachable person, which most people in the business aren't. So that's him in a nutshell, I would say.
Thank you. And before we get into this recent publication, get
Yeah.
behind me, Satan. Um, in terms of the criteria to be selected as an exorcist, let alone the Pope's exorcist, like
Mhm.
you may not have this information, but like what are they looking for when they're looking to select an exorcist?
Oh, based off what Father Amorth has said and what I've heard from a few other exorcists I've interviewed, they are looking for someone who, above all, understands discretion. A lot of people they're dealing with don't want this publicized. They don't want a Hollywood production out of it. They want their privacy preserved. And have to do that while working within the bureaucracy, basically, of the Vatican and doctors and things like that. So they look for people who are have an understanding of discretion. And then they look for people who have an active prayer life, people who have led prayer retreats, people who are every day praying, following the order. And of course, like on the bare basics, in the Catholic Church at least, you have to be a consecrated priest. So that takes a few years of training beforehand, too.
Sure, sure, that makes sense. So let's get into the new book. So
Hmm.
it dives into the daily life and work of Father Amorth, and sheds light on this vocation. So um, let's jump in with some of the points that we kind of outlined for you outlined in our correspondence. This is
I hear you. I can't
I
imagine.
know. My apologies.
No, none at
It's
all.
not easy. Um, how an exorcist diagnose a demonic attack? Start there.
Absolutely. So Father Amorth, and because he later on established the International Association of Exorcists, he set a lot of standards, mostly by going back into the history of the exorcist vocation, seeing what they were doing in early modernity or the medieval ages. And one of the things he brought back that he learned from his instructor, Father Candido, was to approach people with blessed objects, see how they would react. They would do what almost sounds like a holy water test, where they would expose someone to regular water versus holy water. Are they having the same reaction to both? Are they having one without the other? What would that look like? And then there is a little bit of spiritual discernment that goes on. Father Morth didn't think himself very discerning, but said he worked with a lot of other people who had more discernment, more what he called sensitivity to the spiritual realm, things like that. So there would be the physical and the spiritual aspects to it.
And I mean, there was a recent film called The Pope's Exorcist. Is that about the
Yes.
same?
Yes, that's about Father Amorth. Very fictionalized version of Father Amorth,
Oh,
but played
okay.
by
Russell
Russell
Crowe.
Crowe plays him.
Yeah.
Yep.
Cool. Okay. Um, so in terms of diagnosing a demonic attack, like you said, you've got that double blind with holy water, but what are they looking for behavior wise?
Behavior wise, if they have anything that resembles almost an allergy to the sacred, this can even start before the what Father Morth called patients would come to see him. They would not be able to enter into a chapel or a church. It would cause them literal physical pain. So something presenting that type of pain, any type of change in the behavior, knowledge of hidden things, particularly languages they would look out for. That's something you see in a lot of movies is, oh, why does he know Latin? Why does he know Greek? That's not, or with some of the weirder cases, no one knows Aramaic. Why does he know Aramaic? And things like that. So knowledge or knowledge of even hidden things that might be in the priest's life or in the lives of the people around them, if they know something that they just should not know, it could be a sign of the demonic.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Um, Within Islamic lore,
Yes.
is knowledge of Al Ghaib, the unseen,
Mm-hmm.
that is an indicator of jinn possession or
Interesting.
jinn, what they call waswaza, the whispering
Yes.
of devils, whispering of demons. Now,
Yes.
you want to list six types of demonic disturbances. I mean, I've quite an appropriate voice if we're talking about possession. Like, I shouldn't
Yeah.
make bad jokes, but yeah,
Hey, it's added to the sound effects. I love it.
there we go. There we go. Um, Six types of demonic disturbances and how they occur in the
Sure.
life of an exorcist.
Yeah, absolutely. So the most extreme one, the one that gets all the movies and documentaries made about, is of course possession. That's the most obvious, where the demonic entity is taking over the life and trying to take over the mind of the person. That's going to be that will present a lot of these other occurrences too, and the most famous one that exorcists tend to see most often when they're called upon is what's called infestation. That's your classic haunted house type. There's noises in the walls, you can't voices, much like in Islamic religion, the voices that just shouldn't be there. There's no natural explanation for it. And that's the one exorcists are called to most often. And it can also be objects. Classic Hollywood trope of buying a painting does in fact come from Catholic beliefs that sometimes objects themselves can get possessed, and you'd need an exorcist to come out and bless it and exorcise it. And then you get into oppression, where that is basically what it sounds. It's the spirits bringing on almost a depression of sorts in the person, a absolute disdain for life, for all good things. And this can happen especially to the saints, is what Father Amorth believed, that the people who are called upon to be saintly, sometimes almost in a book of Job like way, God will say, okay, do what you want to him. He will still not relent. And that's something you don't see very often. Like I said, Father Amorth only knew of it with Padre Pio, for example, who was attacked by a demonic black dog. And that was the only experience Father Amorth could recall.
That's interesting. Is the black dog comes up again and again in
Yes, yes, it
Islamic lore,
does.
but also in fairy lore. Like
Mm-hmm.
within like British fairy lore, you have the idea of the black shuck, this kind of beastly hound, black hound, that would kind of terrorize villages and you know be seen across misty moors, that kind of thing. Um,
Yeah.
it's interesting, the same symbols and the same metaphors and kind of experiences come up again and again,
Hmm.
irrespective of where you sit and what you believe. Um,
No, and I find that interesting that the black dog, demonic dog, occurs in so much of Western European pagan,
yeah,
for lack of a better word, lore, and you
yeah,
see it again and again, even as Christianity comes along.
yeah, absolutely, it does. Yeah, and in terms of what you said, you mentioned like six types of demonic services. So we got to
Hmm.
oppression. What
Oh,
else?
yes, pardon me. So then, of course, there are physical disturbances. Again, this can happen in the life of a saint where the demon is actually physically harming the person. Not too common, according to Father Amorth. He would usually see it in cases of possession where the demonic is starting to leave marks on a person, bruises, scratches, things like that, that they themselves didn't commit on them, and there's no other person that has committed on them. And then there's probably the most common type of demonic oppression, what's called obsession. And this is where you become, they kind of almost use their charms on you to beguile you in some way. So, again, going back to Padre Pio, if the black demonic dog didn't hurt him, then it would appear as a very alluring, beautiful woman to try to tempt him, to try to basically bring them to their cause. But then you become obsessed. You do not ever wake up from that trance, and it will slowly destroy your life.
Thank you.
Mhm.
Um, Now we got the strange and sometimes occult causes of demonic attacks, and I'm really
Yeah,
interested to hear this particular because
sure.
I've had a lot of occultist guests on
Mhm.
the show, and a lot of people who are practicing occultists of every description who listen to the show. So I'm really interested to hear this
Yeah.
piece.
So, in terms of the occult causes, this is something you just don't see too often in North America. You might see it in Latin America, perhaps, but this is where in Italy there's a practice of going to an occultist who specializes in curses, someone who can, I'm suddenly forgetting the Italian phrase for it, but someone whose entire job is to curse an adversary that you have. So this is working in very black magic. For Father Amorth, that was a cause of roughly, in the few cases where he had genuine demonic possession, which was less than 1% of the cases he saw, he probably saw about a third were caused because someone had acquired a curse against the person. And yeah, like I said, we don't. I don't know. Your tarot reader at the mall doesn't seem to deal in curses, but
No, I mean, yeah, that's a fair statement. I mean, there certainly are people who are sorcerers for hire and
hmm
will carry out that kind of thing. From what I can see, it's not particularly common. Most people are looking for, when they hire a sorcerer, they're looking for standard human stuff. They're looking for, I want my lover back, or I want to hide a transgression, or, you know, indeed, there is that person who has crossed me and is a threat to me, and I want to take aggressive action against them.
that
But
makes sense.
it's from speaking to kind of witches and occultists. What I got back on one particular chap who's very knowledgeable and very upfront in this area. He was saying it's not as common as you think, but it's not as
Sure.
uncommon as you think either.
Ah,
Yeah,
interesting. No, when you were talking about the common sources, I thought, well, in the 16th century, it was buried treasures why you hired a sorcerer, so it
yeah.
hasn't changed that much.
It really hasn't. I mean, you think about what like gin and fairies are associated with, and it's like treasure. So
Yes.
like, human nature doesn't change. Yeah.
No.
So, does he go through cases? I mean, do they differ in some way? Do the
hmm
yeah, they
He has
differ.
a couple. Yeah, he has a. He says he likes to say that the demonic is monotonous. It's not actually that exciting after you've been in the business of exorcism after a while. It kind of all plays together. The devil just does the same tricks over and over. That's why temptation is normally said to be the devil's main trick. It's all he really has. It's tempting us to something. Uh, in a lot of the cases Father Amorth saw, he would experience supernatural events, including extreme ones. His very first exorcism was actually against a spirit calling itself Lucifer. Interestingly, and on another side note, Father Morth says in this book particularly that he thinks Lucifer is a separate being from Satan. Not sure. I hope he goes deeper into that and as we keep translating his works,
Mhm.
but it's an interesting factoid.
I think a lot of occultists would think the same.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah, very much
Okay.
so. Yeah.
Okay, yeah, because according in this book, and this was a new realization because we just translated this book, but he says just as a one-off paragraph, like, "Oh, I think Lucifer might be a different spirit because it interacts with me differently than the one that calls itself Satan."
Yeah, I mean, from a magical perspective, like Lucifer, well, from what I know, what I've experienced is, uh, i- like all the stuff you associate with witchcraft, like
hmm
that's broadly an expression of Lucifer. So
Oh,
the dark man who initiates magic, the flame of illumination, the flame of
oh,
inspiration, is with like Lucifer, the light bringer. Um,
interesting.
but equally, it's extraordinarily complicated because I got asked this
Sure.
in an interview I did the other week where it was like I was asked, Lucifer is traditionally seen as being a deeply evil being. Is is that something that I believe? And I'm like, well, from my experience, it's actually extremely challenging. But it's challenging in a way where, and if I can be a little bit lewd, it
Sure.
challenges you on your bullshit. Like Lucifer is the illuminator; it shines light into everything. So it, bearing in mind his depending on what way you look at it in terms of the story, Catholic story is very straightforward. Sin of
Yes.
pride gets cast down. In Islam, pretty much straightforward. It's Iblis, sin of pride, refuses to bow to Adam and is cast down. In Sufi theology, and all these figures, they overlap in some way. In Sufi,
Hmm.
is the very narrow sect of Sufism, which basically says Lucifer is the ultimate monotheist and would not
Oh,
bow to Adam because he would not bend the knee to anything other than the Most High. Right. So that in essence,
fascinating.
yeah, in essence, what they're saying is Lucifer took the shittest job that God could give him to be his opposer, to be his adversary, to test people, to test their
So
metal.
that's
Uh,
almost in line with what the Romantic poets kind of
mm,
how they looked at Lucifer and
mm,
their interesting theology. Like
yeah,
for them, Lucifer was the one that said he would not bow to anyone, and therefore
mm,
he was kind of the first one willing to break bounds, and he's
yeah,
very celebrated in their poetry for that.
yeah. It's similar.
Fascinating.
Who knows? But it certainly seems to be a very complex relationship. So it's interesting to hear that Father Armath thought that Satan was different to Lucifer. I certainly think that. Um,
Yeah.
and I would say Satan, in my worldview, is closer to a Steiner figure, Ariman, um,
Ah,
which is this kind of like kind of almost like the champion of the inorganic world, the champion of restriction, and it's very hard to articulate. I'm not knowledgeable enough
sure.
really in the area to articulate,
No,
but
I
it's
hear you
kind of
too.
binary between Ahriman and Lucifer and Jesus Christ. This is triangle. This is of dynamism. So it's really interesting to hear when what you want. Anyway, I'm waffling on, and I can't.
Oh, no worries.
So I'm going to hand back to you there.
No, I studied comparative religion in grad school, so I fully enjoy these things. But yeah, for Father Amorth, I brought up Lucifer mostly because his very first encounter with Lucifer was when he was performing his first exorcism solo. He had been in the background of exorcisms. This was his first. I'm an exorcist doing this by myself with my small cadre, and this was also during this exorcism one of the first of two times he experienced the person levitating on him, and otherwise he only saw that one other time. The room went cold, the ice started forming on crystals, everything you can imagine from a horror movie. He experienced his first exorcism, and it wasn't until he asked the demon its name he said, I'm Lucifer. And it was one of the few times he was tempted to be fearful of what he was doing.
I bet.
We were talking about just some of his other cases. He encountered a lot of supernatural disturbances, mostly in the temperature changes and things like that. The more extraordinary stuff like levitation and things of that nature, he experienced very rarely, but he did experience it.
Now, you make a point in the book around how secular and kind of how religious politics have kind of
Hmm.
damaged the recruitment, the practice of exorcism today. Do you want to talk to
Yes,
that?
I would love to. Father Amorth had one of the nice things about him was he was not afraid to say anything, even if he was controversial, and he was controversial a lot of times. He believed very fully that there was, of course, the secular politics of it's the Enlightenment. We now have the scientific method. We don't believe in things like ghosts or gods or things like that anymore. I think we've gotten some pushback towards that, but that's been the defining mindset for most of the last couple hundred years, and that would, of course, have its effect on exorcisms. But he also believed that there was a true effort within the Vatican from people who either bought into the materialist worldview and just said, this is no gods, no spirit, we're just machines, machines with flesh, the modern mindset. Or they were straight up Father Amorth believed that there were Satanists within the Vatican, including at high level positions. Uh, he would point to things like the people who are the cardinals and bishops who are part of Propaganda Due, which was the Freemasonic Lodge. We can get into that weird conspiracy theory later, but it's he believed that there was a concerted effort by people who did not want exorcisms for either secular religious reasons that were keeping it under wraps. And he noted this particularly that canon law never changed. You're supposed to have an exorcist in every diocese, and most dioceses do not. In fact, until Father Amorth came around, there were barely 30 priests in all of Italy. It's now it's now closer to a couple hundred, but before that, it was not too many people.
Excuse me.
Yes.
Um, and you mentioned that kind of mechanistic, inorganic
Mm-hmm.
phrasing. I mean, that's very much what I would define as aromatic. Um,
Yes.
it is worth at some stage having a look at that
Mm-hmm.
world because that's not me giving like Lucifer a pass. There's absolutely challenges there, really are, but that triangle seems to be different areas. At each extreme
Sure.
point, there is difficulty, but there seems to be quite a separate difference in behavior and influence. Um, so looking at some of the key points around the book, you talk about the figure of Satan and key ways
Mm-hmm.
to protect yourself from diabolic snares.
So yeah, the easiest way for any type of protection is always to have a place of prayer, a place where you are humbling yourself and giving gratitude and thanks to God. That was for Father Amorth especially. He wanted people to. He was a very much a man who loved Mary, as many good Catholic boys should, but he loved Mary even before he became an exorcist, so he always had a place for Mary. Yeah. He always had a place for Mary everywhere in his life, so he was big on encouraging people to call on Mary and pray to her, and you would find protection in her, especially in the Immaculate Heart of Mary, as he called it, his favorite devotion. Now, as far as the figure of Satan, he takes a very Catholic view, which is that Satan is the one who was pressed out by Saint Michael the Archangel from heaven with a third of the angels, and then they created hell of their own here on earth as a way of further rebellion against God. Their only goal, as far as Father Amorth has ever commented on, he said it's can be summed up that he wants all of creation to rebel against its creator, is the goal of the demonic.
That's so interesting. Thank you.
Mhm.
Um, you talk about the role of exorcist past and present
Mhm.
and the discernment in counseling afflicted souls.
Yes. So in the Father Amorth, actually, it's interesting. He talks about when he's talking about the role of exorcists in Catholic world, he doesn't necessarily blame the Reformation for suddenly turning away from that. He blames the witch trials that occurred during that same period. Because suddenly, when you have the witch trials, condom for good reason, they were horrific events that traumatized generations of people. Here in the United States, we still talk about the witch trials of 1692. We will still processing that. But what Father Morth noted was instead of a rejection of the mob mentality of the frenzy that can happen around spirituality, we just condemned the wholesale of spirituality. We condemned, whether you were, no matter which side you might have been on in a witch trial, we were condemning the whole process, all the spirituality, all the theology, all the beliefs. And so Father Morth believed that after the witch trials, people just had an allergy to anything spiritual or spiritual warfare in particular.
That makes a lot of sense. I mean, they were very difficult times,
Hmm.
um, and certainly for listeners to this show would be um, very aware of kind of the decimation that
Oh,
occurred during
yes.
this process. But I mean, it's worth noting that, like, particularly in Britain, that there was very much a Protestant thing. It wasn't that much of a Catholic,
Hmm.
um, and really, which was there was a few notable ones in Ireland, but not that many. Um, so lessons from the saints in overcoming the temptations and attacks of the devil. What can we garner from the stories of saints?
One, their perseverance is a virtue for a good reason, and we learned that because most of the attacks, according to Father Amorth and the Catholic Church in general, you're going to experience as temptations, especially to temptation that causes you to not see the humanity in others. Those temptations are the most demonic, we would call them, where you just take away people's whole thingness that makes them human. So the best protection we can have when we look through the saints is that we know that the I mentioned perseverance. That means getting up every day, praying what you have to pray, and learning to do, probably for me at least, I'm a cranky person, so the hardest is learning to love your neighbor as yourself. That's the most difficult. And then we can also learn from the saints, according to Father Amorth, is their unflinching belief in love, especially the love of Christ. If we can learn nothing else from them, they were never tempted to despair of Christ, even when they were, say, in the case of Padre Pio, being attacked by a black demonic dog, or in less extraordinary cases where just life is falling apart around them. They had an unceasing belief that they were doing the thing they were called to do, and they would continue to do it no matter how hard it got.
Thank you. And
Mhm.
and then you outlined that there are three things that can cause a soul to fall
Yes.
into diabolic disturbances. Can you speak to that?
Yeah, so we mentioned a little bit a little bit of curses, purchasing things like that. There's also the more cinematic but rare one of selling your soul to the devil. Again, pretty rare. There's a few historic cases of people who've done it, but mostly rumors of people who have done it. Uh, but still, Father Amorth says it does happen. Someone will get the idea in their head that if they make a pact with Satan, they'll get the things they want. And they may, but they'll also get a lot more with that. And then there's divine permission, which we also touched upon. That's where God, again, in a book of Job scenario, is effectively saying they are faithful, they are good, they're not going to relent in their faithfulness and their goodness. So he'll allow the devil to attack them, to physically assault them, and things of that nature.
See, yeah, interesting.
Yeah.
Um, and where does science sit along this and sit along possession?
Yeah. So one of the fascinating things with Father Morth is he did allow doctors and scientists to even study and observe. He only allowed one time filming of his exorcism, and that was for the William Friedkin documentary, The Devil and Father Amorth. Friedkin was the one who directed The Exorcist, so it's kind of him returning to an old legend. But that was the only time he allowed one to be filmed. But he would allow scientists, doctors, particularly psychiatrists, to analyze. And he himself worked with doctors and psychiatrists, as most Catholic exorcists do, to rule out any natural explanations.
Fascinating. And is there any kind of areas that we haven't covered that you'd like to cover?
Oh, sure, I would love to. Uh, I would say the most among the most fascinating things about Father Amorth, like I said, is that he was willing to say and comment on just about everything. That meant he didn't like Harry Potter. I'll just say that right now. If you're a Potterhead, he was not a fan. So, but he was also willing to talk about modern evils and modern worries that people were having. And he believed that while the demonic were working in all world events, that all world leaders probably had some connection. He also believed very strongly that they could be resisted with something as little as saying the name of God. And this is something I think a lot of people can miss on him. Father Morth he often talked about he was never afraid, he never feared what he was encountering, and he was encountering some strange things because in his mind, he was bringing healing and joy to the people he was helping. And that's something I think can get missed in, especially a horror movie. Love horror movies here, but that can be missed in a lot of Exorcist horror movies.
I find that intriguing that his response to something so devastating and challenging and like classically horrifying is so simple.
Yes, he was very simple in a lot of ways. One of the things I love about reading him was how blunt he was about everything. He was read in theology, he was read in Italian literature, but he also just tended to be very blunt in what he said, including one of his favorite phrases when he was casting out demons. If they cursed at him or started taunting his name, he'd say, "Shut up, you're not worth a cigarette butt," and move on in his exorcism.
Oh, that's interesting. And so, if people want to read more about Father MS, where's the best place for them to do so?
So they can go to sophiainstitute.com. There'll be we've published now, I want to say 5 books translated in English. Uh, this one, Get Behind Me, Satan's great. His other great book that gives you more of his life and work is called My Battle Against Satan. Those are both available on sophiainstitute.com.
Great, great. Well, is there anything else you'd like to go through?
That's a great question. I can't think of anything, I'm sorry to say.
That's okay. That's all right. Well, it can be a short show.
Yeah,
Well, well, Michael, it's been fascinating having
thank
this
you. You
discussion with
too.
you. I really appreciate it. My apologies that I'm not in the best of form with this.
No, I
Uh,
hope you get better. I
I've
really
had a
do
very
feel for
large
you.
hot toddy, and it's done nothing.
Uh, get a
Uh,
second one then.
yeah, well, normally it would at least improve my mood anyway. But very grateful for you reaching out, and thank you very much for coming on the Spirit Box.
And thanks for having me. It's been a
My
joy.
pleasure. My pleasure.
Cheers.
Thank you, Michael. If you're interested in hearing more about the book, then do check the show notes. I'm going to leave it there because I can barely speak.